Ethan Caldwell woke at dawn. The highway was already humming outside, and a neighbor was mowing leaves in his yard, the usual sounds of Silicon Valley. The empty side of his bed reminded him that Morgan had gone out for another run before him. The distance between them was growing, and Ethan chalked it up to his job. He was a lawyer, negotiating big deals for startups. In the kitchen, he pressed the button on the coffee machine. The panoramic windows flooded the house with light, and the aroma of fresh coffee emphasized the idol of his life. A prestigious career, a beautiful house in Palo Alto, a marriage to the girl of his dreams, the son of a congressman. It seemed he had it all. But it was on this morning that a slight dissonance was felt especially acutely for the first time. Perched at the high counter of the kitchen island, Ethan scrolled through the morning news on his tablet. The headlines were filled with the latest successes and scandals of the tech world. His gaze lingered for a second on an article about the upcoming congressional elections. The name of Richard Caldwell, his father. Richard, an influential congressman from California, was up for re-election, and the article listed his accomplishments. Ethan couldn't help but feel the familiar twinge of complex feelings toward his father, pride in his status, but also a hint of irritation at the constant pressure to live up to his family's high expectations. From a young age, Richard had instilled in his children the idea that their family should be a model of integrity. Any misbehavior could become public knowledge and damage their reputation. Ethan remembered how in high school, his father had forced him to publicly apologize for harmless teenage pranks, fearing scandal. This constant scrutiny of others' opinions weighed on Ethan. He appreciated his father's achievements, but sometimes it seemed to him that the glittering facade of their family life was more important to Richard than the sincere feelings of his family. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. The name of Julian, his best friend, appeared on the screen. Ethan smiled and answered. "Hello, Jules. Good morning." "Hello, old man," Julian said cheerfully. "Listen, I have some great news for you. Remember that startup you were working on for? They got funding. It was on the news today." "Really? That's great news." Ethan put down his coffee mug. He was pleased that his friend, as always, was aware of his projects and happy about his successes. "I think it's time to celebrate. How about dinner tonight? I made reservations at our favorite restaurant in San Francisco." Ethan glanced at his electronic calendar. The evening was free, except that his father had invited him and Morgan to some charity event in a few days, but that wasn't today. "Sounds great. I think I deserve a little celebration," he smiled. "Great. Then at 8 at the Marina Grand. And Morgan can join, of course." "Sure. See you in the evening, Jules." Ethan ended the call and thought for a moment. Julian Wright had been like a brother to him since college. They'd moved to Silicon Valley together after Stanford. Ethan to law, Julian to finance. Julian was now a financial consultant helping startups raise money. Their careers often overlapped, and they were supportive of each other in life. To Ethan, Julian was the embodiment of reliability and support, especially valuable in a world where trust is hard to come by. Ethan finished his coffee and went to get ready. He had a busy day ahead of him, a morning meeting with his legal team to prepare a new contract, then a meeting with an important client in San Jose. He put on an expensive dark blue suit and carefully selected a tie. In the mirror, he looked at his well-groomed, self-confident appearance, but something in his eyes betrayed his fatigue. "I need to take a vacation," he thought fleetingly, but the rest kept being postponed. Either a difficult case or a request from his father to speak at an event or his wife's social obligations. Near the garage, he noticed that Morgan's car was gone. She had obviously already left, perhaps to breakfast with friends or to run errands for the charity she ran. In the last year, Morgan had become interested in organizing charity balls and events, maintaining the Caldwell family's reputation in society. Ethan approved of this. His wife was smart, beautiful, and knew how to present herself. She would have made a wonderful first lady. His friends' jokes, hinting at Richard's political ambitions, and perhaps even Ethan's own. The day was rapidly gaining momentum. As Ethan headed out onto the highway, he found himself thinking that he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a quiet breakfast with his wife. More and more of their communication was limited to text messages and social events, where they'd appear hand in hand, pretending to be the perfect couple. He pushed those heavy thoughts aside. Now was not the time to analyze a marriage. Important things lay ahead. By midday, having successfully completed the meeting and finalized the contract details, Ethan allowed himself to breathe a little. The sun was high, warming the asphalt and forcing the air conditioning in the offices to work at full blast. After the meeting in San Jose, he walked out of the glass building, saying goodbye to his partners, and felt his phone vibrate. It was a text from Morgan. "Will you make it to dinner with Julian? I'll be there. Have a nice day." Short and dry. In the past, she would have called, asked how he was doing, maybe sent some funny smiley heart emoji. Now it was just a formal confirmation of plans. Ethan squeezed the phone in his palm, trying to brush off the hurtful thought that their relationship was cooling. Just routine, he convinced himself, throwing the smartphone on the passenger seat. Another trip to the office, a few hours of paperwork, and then a long-awaited evening with his best friend and wife. Perhaps tonight, in the informal setting of his favorite restaurant by the bay, they would be able to relax and feel close again. Deep down, Ethan hoped that this dinner would dispel the looming tension, and everything would return to normal the way it had been before, when he truly believed that his life was perfect. Evening had fallen in a golden twilight over San Francisco Bay. At the Marina Grand restaurant, located right on the water, candles were lit on the tables, flickering in the panoramic windows. Ethan, Morgan, and Julian had taken a cozy table overlooking the pier. The sea breeze was fresh, and a light breeze swayed the candle flame between them. "To the success of Ethan's project," Julian proclaimed, raising his glass of white wine. "Today we celebrate in full force." Morgan joined in the toast, her glass touching Julian's with a melodic ring. Ethan smiled and clinked glasses with both of them. "Thank you for being happy for me," he said warmly. "I appreciate your support." "You deserve it." Morgan gave him her usual social smile, but her gaze quickly slid to the side and got lost behind the glass, where the lights of the yachts bobbed on the water. Ethan noticed her absent-mindedness. For the first half of the evening, his wife seemed lost in her thoughts. She said little, sipped her wine, and twirled a silver ring on her finger. Morgan had always shone at such gatherings. She joked, told stories, made both Ethan and Julian laugh. Today, however, she was quieter than usual. Was she tired, or was something bothering her? "Morgan, are you okay?" Ethan asked quietly, leaning toward her. "You're so quiet." "What?" "Oh, yeah, sorry." She seemed to wake up. "Everything is fine. Just a little headache this morning." "Maybe I shouldn't have drunk then," he asked with concern in his voice. "No, no, everything's fine." She waved it off, and then, as if remembering something, added, "I'm really happy for you, really. You're the best." She kissed him on the cheek, but it was hasty, as if she were obliged. Something about the gesture pricked Ethan. He caught Julian looking at him, watching them over the top of his glass with an expression that was hard to read. Julian caught Ethan looking at him, and his smile widened. "Ethan, remember how back in your second year you said that one day you would be making deals on Silicon Street? Well, dreams come true." "Yeah, well," Ethan shrugged, laughing. Youthful bragging. "But you did it. I'm proud of you, my friend," Julian said sincerely. Ethan nodded gratefully. The tension was still there, though. He noticed Morgan's knee twitching under the table, as if nervously shaking, and she had already finished her drink. "Would you like some more wine?" he offered her. "Okay," she nodded. "Just a little." He motioned to the waiter and ordered more wine. When the waitress walked away, Morgan suddenly said, "I'll be right back. I need to powder my nose." She quickly stood up, taking her purse, and headed for the exit of the hall leading to the restrooms. Ethan watched her go. Almost immediately, he noticed how Julian followed her with his eyes, and then quickly took a sip of water, trying, it seemed, not to look in Ethan's direction. Ethan felt a nagging suspicion. His friends were behaving strangely. He forced himself to look away and glanced around the room. The restaurant was almost full. bohemian couples, a group of loudly laughing colleagues at a large table, someone celebrating a birthday at the bar. A typical lively evening at an expensive establishment. A minute passed, then another. Julian was silent, looking at his phone. Ethan tried to start a conversation. "So, you said you were going on a business trip soon? Where this time?" The friend looked up, as if he hadn't heard right away. "On a business trip? Oh yeah, maybe to New York in a couple of weeks, to work with investors," he said casually, "but it hasn't been decided yet." He glanced briefly toward the hallway where Morgan had gone, then looked back at the screen. Ethan's throat was dry. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was tension in the air that they were both trying to ignore. At that moment, Morgan returned. She sat up, and Ethan noticed that her phone was upside down, a habit she hadn't had before. Almost immediately, the screen lit up with an incoming notification, reflecting a soft white light on the tablecloth. Morgan quickly put the phone in her purse, not even checking to see who had texted. Another alarm went off in Ethan's head. "I think I'll go outside for a bit," Julian said suddenly, putting down his glass. "It's a bit stuffy." "They'll bring the wine right now," Ethan noted. "I'll just walk along the pier for a minute," Julian answered, already on the move. He stood up and headed for the exit. Ethan watched almost automatically as his friend's silhouette disappeared through the glass door. His heart began to beat faster. He glanced at Morgan. She was absently running her finger along the rim of her glass. "Sorry," she whispered, suddenly putting her hand in her purse. "An urgent work call. I'll be out too. I'll answer in a couple of minutes." She stood up and walked quickly along the same route as Julian. What the hell is going on? Ethan wondered. His mind tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe they had a project together that he didn't know about. Or maybe they had conspired to give him some kind of surprise. But his intuition told him otherwise. Doubts that had been building for weeks surfaced. Morgan was disappearing more and more often, avoiding intimacy. Julian had become secretive lately, dropping by less often without something to do. He felt his palms sweat. He grabbed his jacket from the chair. "I'll be right back," he said casually to the waiter, who was just carrying the bottle. Ethan stepped out onto the wooden deck of the pier in front of the restaurant and looked around. The thickening twilight hid the outlines of figures and the silhouettes of people strolling on the beach in the distance. But to the right, around the corner of the restaurant building, where a street lamp shone brightly, he noticed familiar silhouettes. Julian stood under the lantern, almost at the water's edge, and next to him was the figure of Morgan. Ethan stood frozen in the shadow of the wall, his heart in his throat. He saw Morgan lift her hand and gently touch Julian's shoulder, the same gesture she had once used to comfort Ethan when he was worried. Julian leaned closer, said something quietly, and Morgan lowered her head, wrapping her arms around his waist. They were too close, their silhouettes practically blending into one in the dim light. Ethan's temple began to ache. He blinked, hoping he was imagining things. But no, Morgan now raised her face to Julian, and he, tilting his head slightly, touched her lips with his in a gentle kiss. The world before Ethan's eyes swung. In 1 second, his entire being was pierced by a sharp, unbearable pain. He took a step forward, not remembering himself. "What the hell is going on?" His voice broke into a hoarse scream. Julian and Morgan pulled away from each other like criminals caught in the act. The flashlight illuminated their shocked faces. Morgan clapped her hand to her mouth. "Ethan," she breathed out. "This is..." Julian began, but stopped short under Ethan's gaze. Ethan felt everything inside him crumble. Anger, pain, betrayal, all washed over him. He stepped closer, feeling his fists clench. "How could you?" escaped his lips. "My best friend, my wife. Please listen." Morgan stepped towards him, her eyes shining with either tears or fear. Ethan pulled back, not letting her touch. "Don't touch me," he snapped, and there must have been such rage in his gaze that Morgan froze. "Buddy," Julian began pleadingly. "Let me explain. This all happened, unexpectedly." "Don't call me friend," Ethan hissed, his voice shaking. Go to hell, Julian. And you, Morgan, too. He looked back at his wife, not recognizing her. The once familiar face now seemed alien. She was crying, trying to say something, but her words were drowned out by hoarse sobs. Ethan did not want to hear a word of excuses. He felt sick just from the sight of the two of them together. The flame of anger suddenly gave way to icy clarity. He realized that he couldn't stay here for another second. He turned and ran away from the lantern, from this scene, from them. Ethan, Morgan's desperate voice came after them. He didn't turn around. His footsteps echoed loudly across the deck. It felt like a black hole had formed in his chest, sucking in all his thoughts and feelings. Bursting back into the restaurant, he found a waiter without remembering how, threw several large bills on the table, much more than their dinner had cost, and almost ran out into the parking lot. The manager called something after him, but Ethan didn't hear. The car obediently beeped, opening. Ethan got behind the wheel, starting the engine with a trembling hand. A groan escaped his chest, turning into a muffled scream. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel, over and over, until his hand ached. Everything swam before his eyes from the tears that had welled up. How could they? Why? For what? Thoughts were chaotically rushing around in his head. Just this morning, life seemed solid and clear, and now everything had collapsed. The wife he idolized and the friend he trusted like a brother had betrayed him in the most cruel way. The headlights of the cars blurred in his eyes like fiery lines. He pulled out of the parking lot, not really knowing where to go. Home, but what was their empty walls, memories that were now poisoned by lies? Ethan pulled onto the embankment, trying to breathe deeply. His head was pounding. He needed to calm down, to pull himself together. He was in no condition to have a normal conversation, much less deal with the situation right now. All he wanted was to run away, to hide from this nightmare, at least for a while. The highway lane took his car, as if carrying it away from the scene of the tragedy. The lights of a plane, approaching for landing somewhere near San Francisco, flickered in the night sky. Ethan stared straight ahead, gritting his teeth until they hurt. Salty streaks of tears burned on his cheeks, but he did not wipe them away. Somewhere behind him were the two closest people he had lost in an instant. Ahead of him was a dark highway leading into the emptiness of the night. Ethan pressed the gas pedal harder, as if hoping to break away from the pain spreading through his soul. That night, the house, once cozy and familiar, greeted Ethan with deathly silence. Outside, the moonless night had lowered its velvet blanket over Palo Alto, and only the quiet chirping of crickets broke the silence. Ethan entered without turning on the light. His footsteps echoed loudly in the empty rooms. He didn't even remember how he got there. After he left the restaurant, his mind seemed to be on autopilot. He drove around the night highways for 2 hours, trying to escape his thoughts, but the images of what he had seen kept coming back to him. In the end, having exhausted his tears and rage, he felt only emptiness. In the living room, on the glass table, the answering machine recording blinked. Perhaps Morgan was trying to call. Ethan jerked his gaze away, not wanting to listen to her voice now. He walked further down the hallway to the bedroom. The double bed was neatly made, as they had left it that morning. Only now did the sight seem absurd to him. The pillows that still held their names were now empty and cold. He sank down on the edge of the bed, covering his face with his hands. His temples were pounding dully. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Ethan jumped. His heart seemed to skip a beat. Through the half-open bedroom door, he heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. "Ethan," Morgan called excitedly. He stood there, not answering, feeling the anger rising up from somewhere deep in his chest again. The bedroom door creaked softly. Morgan walked in. The light from the hallway outlined her figure. Her hair was disheveled. Mascara was smeared around her eyes. It looked like she had been crying. She had a thin cardigan thrown over her evening dress. It was obvious that she was cold. "Thank God you're home," she whispered, clearly relieved. "I didn't know where to look for you." Ethan looked up. Their eyes met in the dim light. He said nothing, just stared. Morgan shifted nervously from foot to foot, not daring to come closer. Julian gave me a ride, she said quietly. After, after you left, I asked him to take me home. He left right away. Julian's name on her lips burned Ethan like acid. Don't you dare say his name, he said hoarsely. Morgan bit her lip and trailed off. There was silence for a few seconds. Ethan, she finally breathed, I'm so sorry. He smiled bitterly. Sorry, you're sorry, he repeated, his voice tinged with sarcasm. What exactly are you sorry about, Morgan? That I caught you? Or that all this happened? Morgan threw up her hands in despair. Everything, everything at once. Her voice broke, and she threw herself on his knees. Please, listen to me. Ethan jerked, but she had already grabbed his hands, clinging like a drowning woman. Let go. He tried to speak quietly, but inside he was boiling. No, please, listen. She sobbed, not letting go of his hands. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A mistake, he repeated bitterly. I accidentally tripped and fell on his lips, didn't I? Morgan closed her eyes, tears running down her cheeks. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me. You cheated on me with my best friend. Ethan's voice broke. He jumped up, shaking her hands off. Morgan fell to the floor at his feet, but continued to speak through her sobs. I was tired, this busy schedule, responsibility. I felt empty inside me. So you decided that no one but Julian, my best friend, could fill that void inside you, he said dismissively. Morgan rose from the floor, leaning against the bed. I didn't look for it specifically. It just happened. We saw each other often, some common events. He came to visit. We talked. I don't know how it all went so far, really. Her voice broke in a high note. But there's nothing serious between us. Ethan shook his head, letting out a nervous laugh. Nothing serious, you say? Just sleep every now and then, huh? He felt a wave of nausea at his own words. Morgan covered her face with her hands. It was only a couple of times. She tried to speak through her sobs. I wanted to stop it all, honestly. I'm beside myself with shame. Stop. When? Before or after today's kiss? He asked with cold fury. Morgan sobbed louder and dropped her hands. I understand how it looks. There is no excuse for me. But please, let's try to survive this. Together. I was a fool. I gave in to a moment of weakness. I love you, Ethan. Really, what happened with Julian means nothing. Ethan looked at her, trying to figure out if there was any truth in her words, but he couldn't believe it. The image of their kiss was before his eyes. She says, doesn't mean, but then why did Julian's eyes sparkle with tenderness when he looked at her? It means nothing, you say. And for him? Does Julian think it's nothing too? He asked quietly, sinking back onto the edge of the bed, devastated. Morgan wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know. He's very sorry too. He doesn't want to destroy our family. It's too late, Ethan cut her off. The word family was painful. What family had they destroyed? His world. There's nothing we can do to fix it. No, Morgan came closer again, sitting down next to him and trying to take his hand. We can fix everything if we try. We need to talk, maybe go to a family psychologist. We are strong. We have been together for so many years. Don't give up so suddenly, please. Ethan was silent. His gaze was fixed on the pattern of the carpet beneath his feet, but images of the past flashed before his mind's eye. Their wedding 3 years ago on the coast of Big Sur, such a happy day. Their trip to Europe, evenings in this house, when they, hugging, watched movies. He loved her madly, and he was sure that they were happy. Was it all a lie? Or was he himself unaware that he was losing his wife, absorbed in his business? Guilt mixed with rage and pain. She was partly right. He did work a lot, traveled often, or stayed late. But was that an excuse? How long has this been going on? He asked quietly, without turning his head. Morgan sobbed. A few months, she whispered. I don't know how I allowed this. Ethan clenched his jaw. Months of lies. While he believed he was just going through a rough patch at work, that his wife was waiting for him at home. He didn't want to ask this question, But he had to. You slept together. He gave her a piercing look. Morgan blushed and began to cry again, nodding. Yes, once. It was about a month ago. After a charity dinner, we both drank. It went too far. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a cold shower of water wash over him. So while he was in Washington that evening, representing his father at the committee hearing, his wife and best friend, he shuddered. How much did he not know about the people he trusted? "I'll send things to your parents in a few days," he suddenly said distantly, standing up. Everything inside him burned out, only icy determination remained. Morgan jumped up. "What? Wait. What things are you talking about?" "Ethan, no, please." "About yours," he said crisply. "We're getting a divorce." The word hung in the silence like a clap of thunder. Morgan turned pale. "No, no, please." She grabbed his hand. "Don't do this. Give me a chance. Give us a chance." Ethan pulled his hand free, looking her straight in the eyes. "A chance? Do you think I can forget? Can you trust me again? After you looked at someone else the way you were only supposed to look at me?" He shook his head, a lump in his throat. "I can't, Morgan. Never." "But I love you," she cried out desperately. "I was stupid, lost. It's you I love, not him." "If she loved me, she wouldn't have betrayed me," he answered quietly. Morgan's lips trembled. "Please, don't ruin everything. You know that the press will be attracted by the divorce, your father." Ethan looked up. "Oh, so that's it," he said coldly. "Are you worried about your father's reputation? Are you worried about how this will look to others?" Morgan shook her head, grabbing his jacket. "What does that have to do with it? It's just, your father has done so much for us. He'll be upset and everything else." Ethan felt disgusted. "You know, right now I don't care what people think. I've had enough of lies and appearances," he said firmly. "I'm filing for divorce." Morgan slowly lowered her hands. He saw something like anger flash in her wet eyes. "Okay," she said suddenly, sharply, sobbing one last time and wiping away her tears. "If that's what you've decided, but know this, it will be hard for all of us." "Believe me, things are already hard for me," he answered bitterly. Morgan nodded, looking at the floor. "Should I leave now?" Ethan nodded. He didn't want to see or hear from her again. At least not tonight. "Do as you wish," he said wearily and turned away. He heard her stand there for a few seconds, breathing heavily, then turn and run out of the bedroom. The front door slammed. When her footsteps faded, Ethan finally allowed himself to collapse back onto the bed. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling his heartbeat dull and slow. The tears had dried. There was a strange emptiness and numbness. Her thoughts were confused, so she was worried about what her father would say. Of course, Richard Caldwell, the consummate politician, would not tolerate scandal. Morgan was probably already thinking about how to present the situation to him. Perhaps it was fear of his reaction that had made her beg for the marriage to continue. Did she truly love Ethan, or was she simply afraid of ruining the advantageous alliance of two powerful families? Ethan winced. The questions only made it worse. He was from a powerful family, yes, but he loved Morgan sincerely. There was no talk of calculations. Was it really any different for her? Ethan hadn't slept a wink as dawn approached. He sat in the kitchen, watching the sky turn gray in the east. A plan was forming in his head. He wouldn't keep quiet about what had happened for someone else's benefit. Divorce was inevitable. But before he made a move, he needed to prepare. Morgan would do anything to save face, perhaps even twist the facts, which meant he needed proof, clear and irrefutable. Ethan remembered a familiar private detective whom a colleague had once recommended. Leon Carver, a former police officer, now a private investigator, capable of getting to the bottom of any truth. Then, 6 months ago, a colleague had hired Carver to check the background of an unreliable partner. Could Ethan now turn to him for help in exposing his own wife and friend? It was bitter to realize, but yes, he would have to. When the first rays of dawn fell on the kitchen, illuminating Ethan's tired face, he already knew what he would do. First, a detective and collecting facts, then a lawyer and divorce proceedings. His heart sank at the thought of the upcoming war, but apparently there was no other way. After all, his past life no longer existed, it had been destroyed that night. Now all that was left was to pick up the pieces and try to start anew. The next morning greeted Ethan with gray skies and a heavy head. He had barely slept, and now, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, he tried to collect his thoughts. The house was quiet. Morgan had not returned, and that was for the best. The phone had run out of battery during the night, and Ethan had deliberately not put it on charge, not wanting to talk. But he couldn't keep quiet for long. As soon as the clock approached 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang decisively. His parents were standing in the doorway. Lauren Caldwell, an elegant woman in her 60s with impeccable hair and a worried expression, stepped forward first and hugged her son. Richard Caldwell, a tall, handsome man with graying hair at the temples, looked stern and intense. "Ethan, dear," said his mother, looking into his face, "we heard about what happened. Can we come in?" Ethan stepped back silently, letting them in. His heart ached. Just yesterday, he had thought that his parents would be his support in any trouble. But what would they say now? Lauren walked into the living room, and Richard followed her. His father looked around, and his gaze fell on the empty coffee cup on the table and the picture of Ethan and Morgan together on the shelf. It was from their wedding. Richard sighed heavily and turned to his son. "Morgan called us," he began without preamble. "She spent the whole night with us. She was in a terrible state, crying." Ethan felt a twinge of fear that Morgan had run to his parents for comfort. He clenched his jaw. "In a terrible state," he repeated slowly. "Did she tell me why?" Lauren placed her hand gently on her son's forearm. "Yes, dear. She admitted that she stumbled. But she insists that she loves only you and is sorry. She herself does not understand what came over her." Ethan pulled back, his gaze hardening. "Stumbled? Is that what you call it? She cheated on me with my best friend. Are there really any mitigating words here?" Lauren's face twitched painfully. "Son, we're not justifying her, of course," she said quietly. "But maybe it makes sense to listen, not to act rashly." "She made a huge mistake," Richard interjected, his tone harsher. "But you know, marriage is a place where things happen. You have to be able to forgive." "Forgive?" Ethan shook his head in disbelief, looking at his father. "Are you serious right now? You're young, your blood is hot," Richard continued, looking him straight in the eye. "But let's think about it rationally. You have a family, you've been married for 3 years. To ruin everything because of a single misdeed, is that right?" Ethan felt anger boiling inside him. A single offense. How do you know it was a single offense? She herself admitted to me that their relationship lasted for several months. Lauren pressed her hand to her chest in shock. "God." Richard frowned. "Morgan didn't say that." "Maybe I didn't tell you everything," Ethan smiled bitterly. "It's easier to present it as a moment of weakness." Lauren sank down onto the couch, shaking her head in shock. "How is this possible? We thought you were such a happy couple." "We were happy, Mom," Ethan said wearily, "until I found out that I was being deceived all this time." There was a tense silence. Richard paced the room and stopped at the window. "Listen," he finally said, his voice calm. "We're not taking sides, but we need to make the right decision, not just based on emotions." "What are you suggesting?" Ethan crossed his arms over his chest. The father frowned. "I suggest we don't air our dirty laundry in public. At least not now." Ethan frowned. "In terms of—" Richard turned around. "You know yourself that now is an extremely inappropriate time for family scandals. My elections are in 3 months. Any rumor, any leak to the press." He did not finish, but it was clear anyway. Ethan felt a lump of bitterness rise in his throat. "So you're asking me to pretend nothing happened for the sake of your campaign? I suggest you and Morgan sort this out quietly between yourselves," Father answered harshly. "Without court, without publicity. If you can't forgive her, at least postpone any drastic steps. Your family should look prosperous from the outside, you understand, at least until the elections. Lauren nodded quickly. Yes, my dear, we are all in the public eye now. Journalists are always digging into private lives. If they find out... If they find out what? Ethan interrupted sharply. That Morgan cheated on me, and I didn't stand for it. What's wrong with me wanting a divorce after that betrayal? The father turned purple. It will be a scandal. All the magazines will trumpet that the congressman's daughter-in-law is cheating on her son. Opponents will take advantage of this and start digging up dirt. Rumors will spread, they will savor the details. Your name, the name of our family, will be at the center of unpleasant discussions. All politics is built on reputation, Lauren added quietly. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices to preserve it. Ethan smiled bitterly. So, the sacrifice is my honor and dignity, my happiness. Are you suggesting that I close my eyes and lie as if nothing happened, so that no one would feel awkward? Don't exaggerate, Richard snapped. We just need to resolve everything in a civilized manner, without noise. If you really want to, you can get divorced later, calmly, citing, say, incompatibility of characters. That happens in families. Divorce later. Ethan shook his head. No way. I'm not going to live with a man who betrayed me, not a day longer. The mother stood up again and came up to him, looking into his eyes with a pleading expression. Son, please. We understand your pain, but think about the future. Maybe not all is lost. Morgan really does seem remorseful. She talked to us. I can see she loves you. She just did something terribly stupid. Ethan remembered his wife's tear-stained face and felt pain, but then anger washed over him. She begged me to save the marriage, not because of great love, Mother. She is afraid of scandal, just like you. Lauren shook her head. No, she really loves. That's enough, Ethan snapped. I've made my decision. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm doing it as soon as possible. Richard and Lauren exchanged worried glances. Father narrowed his eyes. Look, if it's about anger, let's find a way out. Morgan is ready to agree to some conditions, to see a psychologist, to control her every step. She says that she's ready to do anything for you. Maybe you'll give her a chance to atone for her guilt. Ethan couldn't believe his ears. He clenched his fists, trying to keep himself under control. Atone? With what? With humiliating repentance all my life. I can't live with her anymore, Dad. Not now, not after your elections. You have to think about her reputation, too, Richard added stubbornly. The girl made a mistake, yes, but the stigma of a divorcee, a big scandal, neither she nor we need that. Her reputation? Ethan's eyes flashed. And what about mine? She betrayed me. Why should I care about her good name? The father sighed heavily and changed his tone to a colder one. Because that's how it has to be. Sometimes worse family matters have had to be hushed up. You just haven't realized yet that politics requires the ability to swallow personal grievances for the common good. The common good, Ethan repeated quietly. He finally realized that the support he had hoped for was nowhere to be found. His son's happiness was far from the father's first priority. Well then, if you and Morgan have agreed on everything, then you don't need to convince me. He walked around the room, collecting his thoughts, then stopped in front of his parents. I won't hush anything up. I'll get a divorce. If it's unacceptable for your image, well, I'm sorry. Richard's face hardened, his chin trembled. You're putting everything our family has worked for over the years at risk. Don't you understand? You don't seem to understand that I'm broken, Ethan replied with emotion. My life is ruined, and your offer is a slap in the face. Lauren burst into silent tears. Darling, we're trying to save the situation. Save who? He snapped. You? Her? But definitely not me. He felt he couldn't bear it any longer. Please go away, he said quietly, pointing to the door. His mother opened her mouth, but Richard put his hand on her shoulder, stopping her. His father stared hard at Ethan for a few seconds. Think carefully, son, he said clearly. You're making a mistake. A mistake, Ethan echoed. Perhaps the only mistake was my marriage to Morgan and believing that family would always support me. He opened the door wide. Richard took Lauren by the arm and led her to the exit. Having already crossed the threshold, the mother turned around, her eyes full of tears. "We love you, Ethan. We just want what's best for you." He didn't answer. The moment the door closed, Ethan's strength left him. He sank into a chair, trying to stop his hands from shaking. Bitter thoughts throbbed in his head. Was his own father really willing to sacrifice his son's well-being for the sake of political points? In their world, it seemed more important to maintain a decent image than to support a loved one. If your family isn't on your side, then what's the point? Flashed through his mind. But inside, a stubborn resolve was already growing. He would no longer play by these rules. If his family turned away when he needed it, well, he would have to go his own way. The wall clock ticked loudly in complete silence. Ethan stood up. He still had a task to hire a detective and get evidence. Now, after talking with his parents, he understood. He needed this evidence not only for the trial, but also to defend himself if someone tried to present the situation in a different light. An hour later, Ethan was already driving along the highway towards San Francisco, where Leon Carver's office was located. There was no doubt left in his soul. From this moment on, he would rely only on himself, or on those who were truly on his side. Leon Carver's office was on the fourth floor of a modest brick building in southern San Francisco. It wasn't fancy, but it was tasteful. Minimal furniture, a photo of the Giants' baseball team on the wall, and case files on the shelves. Leon himself, a trim man in his 50s, with short gray hair and a sharp gray gaze, greeted Ethan with a firm handshake. "I sympathize with your situation, Mr. Caldwell," he said, inviting her to sit down. "Your colleague briefly outlined the situation to me over the phone yesterday. How can I help you?" Ethan, nervously squeezing his fingers, recounted everything from the very beginning. How he learned about the betrayal, how his parents were trying to hush up the scandal. Leon listened attentively, nodding, only occasionally asking for details. "I want to collect evidence of infidelity for the divorce proceedings," Ethan finished. "Photos, correspondence, anything that will prove her guilt." "I see," Leon said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "This is standard work. Do you want to go to trial? Typically in California, irreconcilable differences is enough for a divorce, no fault required." "I know," Ethan nodded. "But in my case, I need to have some trump cards. If Morgan or her lawyers try to spin it differently, and my parents are pressuring me, I want to be prepared." "That's reasonable. Well, there won't be any problems with that. You said she's moved in with her parents now." "As far as I understand, yes. Probably at my parents' house," Ethan grimaced. "Ridiculous, but true. So, we won't take any photos together at home, but we'll be able to track her meetings. I think she and your friend," Carver emphasized the word slightly, "will be careful. But sooner or later, they'll definitely meet." "Yes," Ethan answered quietly, looking down. It still cut into his heart to think that Morgan and Julian might continue to see each other. "Do you need anything else besides proof of treason?" Leon asked, leafing through the notebook where he had made a few notes. Ethan thought about it. He remembered the strange things that had been happening to Julian lately. "You know, I'd like to know everything you can about Julian Wright," he said, surprising himself. "We were friends for years, but I know I didn't know him very well. If he has any other dark secrets, I think it might come in handy." Leon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Do you suspect anything specific?" Ethan hesitated, remembering separate conversations with a friend about investors, schemes. "He's a financier. He helps companies raise capital, but sometimes he's done risky business. Who knows?" "Okay, we'll check his activities too," Leon nodded. "Anything could come up, from fraud to debts. Sometimes such things motivate people to desperate actions." Ethan gave a wry smile. "For example, sleeping with a friend's wife." Carver grinned knowingly. "Also a variant of a desperate act." They discussed financial issues and timeframes. Leon warned that collecting materials would take time, at least a week or two of observations and analysis. Ethan agreed. There was no rush. Although they wanted to formalize the divorce as soon as possible, everything had to be done correctly. The next few days were painful for Ethan. He took a short leave of absence from work for family reasons, citing a family illness to avoid unnecessary questions. The news that the model Caldwell couple had cracked had not yet filtered into their circle. Morgan did not show up, and they communicated only through short, neutral messages when necessary, mainly regarding when to pick up her things. Fortunately, they did not discuss any details Ethan did not want to see or talk about her. He turned all his attention to preparing for the divorce. He hired a divorce lawyer, discussed strategy. Since they did not have children and a strict prenuptial agreement, difficulties were not expected, but Ethan was sure that Morgan would try to sue for a decent share of the property if it came to an open conflict, especially if her parents supported her financially. Sometimes in the evenings, Ethan wondered how his life had come to be such a mess. A week ago, he had been planning a vacation with his wife, and now he was sitting in an empty house, sorting through boxes of her abandoned things. Every little thing, her favorite cup, the blanket on the couch, the perfume on the vanity, was a memory. To somehow drown out his thoughts, he took long drives without a destination or wandered to deserted beaches along the coast. One evening, about 10 days into Leon's tenure, Ethan's phone rang. It was Carver himself. "Mr. Caldwell, I have news," he said matter-of-factly. "Would you like to discuss it now, or should we set up a meeting?" "Speak," Ethan tensed, putting aside the book he had been mindlessly leafing through. "We were unable to record any meetings between Miss Caldwell and your friend. They kept their distance. Apparently, they understand that they are under surveillance. But we were able to obtain confirmation of their correspondence." "Really?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, we were lucky. Mrs. Caldwell was not very careful with her email. Our specialist restored the deleted messages from her backup. There are some rather incriminating explanations there." Ethan's throat was dry. He closed his eyes, gathering his courage. "Got it. Anything I need to know, other than the obvious?" Leon chuckled. "Well, besides the declarations of love, there are some interesting details. For example, a discussion of how to convince you to sell a certain piece of land." Ethan frowned. "A plot of land? There's a letter from a month ago. She wrote to Julian that she had spoken to you about selling some old family holdings, but you had refused. That caught my eye because in another letter Julian was swearing that he really needed the money and was counting on that deal." Ethan tried to remember. Yes, a few weeks ago Morgan had mentioned in passing that there were people interested in buying a small plot of land in Sacramento that he had inherited from his grandfather. He had been surprised then the plot was not of particular value. He had replied that he did not intend to sell, for the sake of memory. Morgan had not pressed him further. Strange. "And what follows from this?" he asked Leon. "It's not clear yet, but it could indicate that Julian needed money. We checked his bank records and managed to get some. He had recently made large transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Translations? From whom? From several private corporations and trusts. The sums are impressive, and most importantly, after these tranches, cash was withdrawn almost immediately in the S. Such schemes are often used to hide the origin of funds." Ethan felt a chill. So Julian was dishonest. "Do you think this is something illegal?" "It seems so. I'm still digging. Some of the names of the companies that were the source of the money came up in connection with offshore scandals a couple of years ago. There's a chance your friend is involved in money laundering or blackmail." The word blackmail echoed especially loudly in Ethan's ears. Blackmail. Who? It is not yet known. But the scheme is typical. There is information about offshore accounts of some influential person or company, and they pay for silence. Ethan ran his hand over his forehead. He could hardly believe that this was about Julian. So, Jules, I mean, Mr. Wright, maybe he was blackmailing someone, and they paid him. It turns out that way. Now I'm trying to figure out who the victim is. One name that has come up is a certain fund associated with technology investments. Leon mentioned the name of the fund, and Ethan recognized it, a large venture capital firm he had once worked with. The thought was unpleasant. Perhaps Julian was blackmailing one of their mutual business contacts. "It's incredible," he said quietly, "although now I won't be surprised by anything. In any case, we have your wife's correspondence, which directly confirms her connection with Wright." Leon returned the conversation to the main topic. "That's enough to present to the judge if necessary. We can also use it as leverage in negotiations. Most likely, knowing that we have such evidence, the other side will prefer not to bring it to a scandal." Ethan nodded, although Leon couldn't see it over the phone. "Yes, I think that's what we'll do. Actually, that's where my main work ends. If you want to get the materials, I can give you a flash drive with copies of letters and reports tomorrow." "Of course I do," Ethan replied. "Let's meet." They agreed to meet the following morning. Ethan spent the rest of the evening pacing the house, processing what he had heard. Julian was involved in some dark business involving blackmail and money. Perhaps his desperate situation had driven him to an affair with Morgan, or perhaps the success of the blackmail had turned his head so much that he felt all-powerful. It seemed now that he had never really known the real Julian. As he was going to bed, Ethan suddenly thought, could it be that the target of the blackmail was his father? Richard Caldwell, being a congressman, moved in the circles of big money. But no, his father was careful, and there was no news of any offshore scandals surrounding him. Besides, having learned about Morgan and Julian's connection, his father would rather explode than cover for them if he suspected that Julian was a blackmailer. Although, the behavior of his parents yesterday. Ethan dismissed the thought as too fantastic. It was unlikely. The victim was most likely someone from the Silicon Valley business elite. Anyway, this was no longer Titan's war. Let law enforcement sort it out when the time comes. And his battle was clear: get a divorce and leave this story with minimal damage to his mental health, if that was even possible. About a month passed, and the divorce case was approaching its final stages. Thanks to the evidence obtained and Ethan's determination, the process went relatively smoothly. Morgan, through her lawyers, initially tried to argue about the division of property, but as soon as they hinted that her reputation would be damaged if the details of the betrayal were disclosed, the tone changed. In the end, by the appointed day of signing the agreement, everything was agreed upon. The house remained with Ethan, a significant compensation went to Morgan, and in exchange both parties pledged not to air their dirty linen in public. 4 people were gathered in the law firm's conference room, a neutral space: Ethan and his lawyer, Morgan and her representative. The sun shone coldly through the glass wall, reflecting off the polished table. Ethan sat across from his ex-wife, barely looking at her. He was wearing a sharp gray suit, the same one they had once worn to gala dinners. Now it felt like armor, hiding his exhausted heart. The lawyers read the final clauses of the agreement. Somewhere in the distance, the city hummed, the echo of traffic rising to the high ceilings. Ethan heard his lawyer's voice as if through cotton wool, the formal words merging into the background. He looked at the papers in front of him, at the lines of legal text that would end his marriage. "If everyone agrees, sign here and here." Morgan's lawyer's voice brought him out of his reverie. Ethan lifted his pen, ready to sign. His gaze involuntarily slid to the opposite side. Morgan had already signed her side and was now sitting with her head down. She looked pale, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, no trace of the radiant, confident woman he had once shone next to. In front of her lay the neatly folded sheets of paper and her wedding ring. She had taken it off before signing and now seemed unsure what to do with it. It was still lying next to her pen. Ethan felt a pang of memory, placing that ring on her finger on their wedding day. A vow of love and fidelity, how cruelly it had been broken. He looked down at his finger. He had stopped wearing his own ring 2 weeks ago, when the decision had become final. "Mr. Caldwell," his lawyer reminded him quietly. Ethan winced and signed his copies, then the copies opposite. Period. The lawyers looked at each other as they took the documents. "Thank you, gentlemen," said Representative Morgan stiffly. "We will notify the court of the settlement agreement." Well, that's all, Ethan's lawyer nodded, glancing at him. You can go, Ethan. Ethan stood up. His heart ached strangely. 3 years of his life had ended so easily, with 2 strokes of the pen. There was a feeling of emptiness and relief in his soul at the same time. Morgan stood up too. Their eyes met for a moment. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. Ethan, she began suddenly. His lawyer tactfully headed for the exit, dragging his colleague along with him, leaving the former spouses alone. Ethan waited, coldly polite, without emotion on his face. Morgan picked up her ring from the table and squeezed it in her palm. I, I just wanted to say that I'm truly sorry that it all turned out this way, she said in a trembling voice. I feel guilty towards you. You're a good person, and you didn't deserve this. Ethan was silent. He couldn't bring himself to answer anything. Morgan paused and continued. I hope that in time you will be able to, at least not hate me. He saw how hard it was for her to find the words. Not long ago, he probably would have pitied her at such a moment. But now he felt only fatigue. I don't want to carry the hatred any further, Morgan, he said quietly at last. But I can't forgive either. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. I understand. Thank you for being honest. Ethan pressed his lips together. I think it would be better if we didn't meet again, he said softly but firmly. It would be easier for both of us. Morgan covered her face with her hand for a moment, then pulled herself together. Yes, you're probably right. She looked at him one last time. I wish you to find happiness, Ethan. Really. He didn't answer, just nodded, accepting her words as a given. The ex-wife turned and walked quickly out of the room before he could see her new stream of tears. The door closed softly behind her. Ethan exhaled, feeling the tension leave his muscles. It was over. It felt strange to be single again and with so much baggage behind him. But the end of this chapter was necessary. He gathered his papers. The lawyer was waiting for him in the hallway, offered him a ride, but Ethan refused. He wanted to walk. He thanked the lawyer for his help and headed for the elevator. A cool breeze blew through him as he left the building. San Francisco was going about its business. People hurrying to lunch, cars honking below. It was a normal day for everyone, and for him alone, it was a turning point. Stopping on the sidewalk, Ethan suddenly felt that there was nothing holding him here in this city. This metropolis, which had given him a career and, it seemed, happiness, now evoked only bitter associations. On every corner were memories of the past. There was the cafe where he and Morgan often had breakfast on weekends. Further on, he could see the office where he had rushed every morning for so many years, burning with enthusiasm. All this was now in the past. He pulled out his phone. The screen was full of missed calls. From his mother, from Claire, his sister, had called several times, but Ethan hadn't been ready to talk even to her before. Now, perhaps, was the time. He pressed the call. His sister answered almost immediately. Ethan, oh my God, finally, I was worried. Hearing her voice, warm and familiar, Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Hello, Claire, he said quietly. How are you? What's going on? Mom and Dad haven't really said anything, except that you and Morgan are having problems. Claire chartered quickly, worried. I only found out about it from Mom a couple of weeks ago, and I tried to call you. Sorry, I needed time. Where are you now? Let's meet and talk. Claire lived in San Francisco, renting an apartment not far from the center. Unlike her parents, she did not get involved in politics and lived quite independently, working in an art gallery. Ethan always felt that she was an ally. Yes, let's do it, he agreed unexpectedly for himself. Can you do it today, in the next hour? Of course. Come to me, I'll be at home, the sister responded immediately. Ethan felt like he needed to talk to her, like he needed oxygen. He needed at least one person close to him who was on his side unconditionally. Half an hour later, he was already entering the entrance to the old Victorian house where Claire lived. His sister opened the door before he had time to ring the bell and hugged him tightly on the threshold. Ethan, God, you're not yourself, she muttered, looking into his face. He smiled sadly. It was a difficult month. They walked inside. Claire's cozy living room smelled of coffee and vanilla. She sat her brother down on the sofa and covered him with a blanket, as if he was shivering, although it wasn't cold outside. Her very presence warmed him. "Now tell me everything," his sister asked softly, sitting down next to him and taking his hand. What really happened? Ethan exhaled, and he told her. About that night on the dock, about the conversation with his parents, about how he had been forced to gather evidence, about the litigation of the last few weeks. Claire listened without interrupting, her eyes widening in horror and outrage. When he mentioned that his parents had sided with Morgan for the sake of the campaign, his sister shook her head. "Damn it. I love my mom and dad, but sometimes they become completely blind because of politics. That's why I need to leave," Ethan said quietly, voicing the thought out loud for the first time. Claire wasn't surprised. "Are you seriously thinking of leaving?" "Yes. Everything here reminds me of." He waved his hands around of this whole nightmare. "And my parents. I can't communicate with them now. They didn't understand me. I need to distance myself." The sister squeezed his hand. "I understand. You know I'm on your side. If it's better for you, I'll support you." "Thank you," Ethan said, feeling warm inside for the first time in a long time. "You have no idea how important that is to hear." Claire smiled. "I can imagine. So where are you planning to move?" Ethan thought for a second. "I have some thoughts. I've always liked Seattle. Remember, I've been there a few times for conferences. The city has character, and the climate is different. Rainy, it suits my mood," he grinned. Claire sighed. "It's a bit far, of course. But maybe that's exactly what you need: a new place, new people." She stood up, went to the sideboard, and took out a bottle of whiskey. "I think we should have a drink tonight. To a new chapter in your life, brother." Ethan didn't argue. She poured them each a small glass of amber liquid. Claire raised hers. "For you. Let there be something good ahead. It can't be otherwise." "Let it be," he responded and took a sip. The whiskey burned his throat, but the warmth and his sister's presence made it a little easier to breathe. For the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. There really could be a new chapter ahead, and he was ready to start it. A month after the divorce was finalized, Ethan sat on a plane approaching Seattle International Airport. Thick gray clouds stretched outside the window, through which rays of sunlight filtered every now and then, illuminating the glittering surface of the ocean in the distance. His soul was both anxious and strangely calm. The unknown lay ahead, but the chaos of the past months was behind him. He arrived light, with a few suitcases of clothes and essentials, and decided to leave the rest in California for safekeeping with Claire or sell it. He put his Palo Alto house up for sale, not yet knowing whether he wanted to return. So far, it seemed that he didn't. The airport greeted him with a cool wind and the smell of pine needles. The proximity of the endless forests surrounding Seattle was immediately felt. Having received his luggage, Ethan got into a taxi and gave the address of the temporary apartment that he rented for the first time. The car drove onto the highway, and unusual landscapes stretched around. Tall firs, gray-blue sky, low clouds touching the tops of skyscrapers in the distance. The city of Seattle itself opened up first with a port crane, then with the silhouette of the Space Needle Tower, sticking out above the panorama like an alien lighthouse. Ethan felt a slight thrill, as if he had entered another world. There was no sun-scorched gloss of California here, but instead it was damp and cool and green. The city seemed quieter, though it was still bustling with life. The taxi dropped him off at a 3-story brick building in the artsy Capitol Hill neighborhood. It was there that he rented a small apartment through an agency, a bright studio overlooking a quiet street. After unpacking, Ethan walked through the space. Minimal furniture, nothing extra, just what he needed to start over. In the evening, tired from the journey, he went out for a walk. A light rain drizzle, forcing him to pull up his hood. He walked along the streets, listening to the foreign speech around him. Oh yes, this city was foreign, but that was what made it attractive. People in waterproof jackets rushed past on bicycles. The air smelled of coffee from endless cafes. A street musician played on the corner, strumming his guitar under an awning. No one recognized Ethan, no one knew about his past. This gave him a feeling of freedom. He walked down to the Puget Sound waterfront. In the distance, he could see ferries gliding between the islands. The one on the left seemed to go to Bainbridge. Ethan remembered reading about that island, a satellite of Seattle, quiet and green. He wondered if he would live somewhere like that one day, away from the hustle and bustle. The thought sank into his mind. The days dragged on. At first, Ethan allowed himself a break. He walked around the city, exploring the surroundings. He visited the bustling Pike Place market, where he bought fresh fruit and lingered to watch fishermen skillfully throw salmon to each other over the counter. He stood outside the world's first Starbucks, where tourists were milling about. At the entrance to the cafe, a homeless guy played guitar, collecting coins from passers-by, a reminder that this city, too, has its own acute social problems. Ethan couldn't help but think about the contrast. The richest companies next to tents where people who have been left behind by success spend the night. He shook his head, feeling both sadness and determination to do his bit for change. Then he walked along the green alleys of Cary Park, from where a breathtaking panorama of the city center with the bay and Mount Rainier on the horizon opened up. These walks gradually washed away the weight of the past, replacing it with new impressions. But he couldn't stay idle for long. One such morning, Ethan sat down in a coffee shop overlooking a rainy street and began to browse the news on his laptop. An article about Seattle's growing eco-startup scene caught his attention. The city has become a leading center for climate innovation. It described companies working in renewable energy, waste recycling, and ocean protection. Ethan read about young entrepreneurs trying to change the world and found himself, for the first time in a long time, truly passionate about something. He remembered how, as a law student, he had dreamed of helping good people do good things. But then his career had taken him into the corporate world, where it was all about profit. Maybe now was a chance to return to those ideals. After finishing the article, Ethan made a decision. He opened a text editor and started composing a letter. The recipients were several local environmental projects whose contacts he found. In the letter, he offered his help as a lawyer on a voluntary basis. He wrote that he had recently moved and wanted to use his skills for good, to help startups with legal issues. Drafting contracts, registering patents, negotiating with investors, everything he was good at. After sending the letters, he felt an inspiration he hadn't felt in a long time. The first replies arrived that same day. Some thanked him for the offer and asked him to send his resume. Others immediately invited him to a meeting to discuss the details. It was an encouraging response. A week later, Ethan was already fully immersed in his new occupation. In the morning, he could meet with a team of a startup developing portable desalination units for coastal communities, and in the afternoon, he could call the founder of a plastic waste recycling company, helping to think through the terms of a partnership. His knowledge and experience were in great demand. Ethan worked without asking for payment for a while. He had enough compensation from the division of property, and he had savings. It was much more important to feel needed again and see that his efforts were useful. Among his new acquaintances, there were some amazingly inspired people. Their sincere enthusiasm inspired Ethan himself. He went to meetings in co-working spaces, to noisy open space offices in the center, and sometimes to test sites outside the city where young engineers tested their ecological inventions. Talking to them, he began to forget the pain of the past. The present seemed too exciting. One such day, returning to his apartment late in the evening, Ethan opened his laptop to check his email. Among his work emails, he noticed a letter from his sister. Claire was asking how he was doing, telling him that things were relatively quiet at home. His parents were busy with his father's campaign. Morgan had gone to visit her relatives for a while. Claire wrote that she missed him, but understood him and was glad that he was trying to find himself. At the end, there was a phrase, "If you need my help or just to talk, I am always in touch." Ethan leaned back in his chair, grateful. He immediately texted his sister back, detailing what he was doing and assuring her that he was fine. He couldn't lie about being fine. His wounds were still bothering him, and the loneliness of the evenings was acute. But at least he had a purpose during the day, and that was a lot. Before going to sleep, he looked out the window. Raindrops were tapping on the glass, street lamps were reflected in puddles. This city accepted him without asking unnecessary questions, and in return he wanted to become a part of its life, to absorb its spirit. Ethan said quietly into the void, "I can handle it." As if in response, a distant night fairy's horn blared, and Ethan allowed himself to smile for the first time that day. It was as if the city itself approved of his decision to start over. Among the projects Ethan helped, a startup called Oceanus occupied a special place. Its young team was developing a system for cleaning ocean water from plastic waste using autonomous drones. Ethan advised them on legal issues of patenting technology and drafting contracts with investors. One day, he was scheduled to meet at their office on the outskirts of Seattle, an old warehouse converted into a lab and co-working space. Ethan walked inside and looked around with interest. High ceilings, prototypes of devices everywhere, the smell of soldering and freshly brewed coffee. Several engineers were leaning over a drone model, discussing something heatedly. "Ethan," the startup's leader, a vivacious guy named Marco, called out. "Glad you dropped by. Danielle's about to join us, and then we'll get started." "Daniela?" Ethan asked, taking off his jacket. "Our PR manager," Marco explained. "Helps us with presentations and public relations. She literally saved our last pitch to investors." Ethan smiled. "Sounds impressive." "Of course," Marco winked. "Without her, we'd be bogged down in terms and graphs. But she knows how to get an idea across to any bore." At that moment, a clear female voice was heard. "Do I seem to hear compliments addressed to me?" Ethan turned around. A girl in her 30s with short brown hair and attentive brown eyes was approaching them. She was dressed casually, jeans, a light green sweater, and a bright scarf that gave her look a creative touch. "Daniela, meet Ethan Caldwell, our legal genius," Marco introduced. "And this is Danielle Harper, our communications genius." "It's a pleasure," Daniela smiled and extended her hand. "I've heard nothing but good things about you." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Ethan gently shook her hand. "I've been told about your success with presentations." "Oh, Marco is exaggerating," she dismissed with a slight laugh. "I'm just helping these guys speak in a language they understand." "That's worth a lot," Ethan said. "Their ideas are brilliant, but sometimes engineers forget that not everyone around them is a physics PhD student." Daniela laughed. "Well spotted." Marco glanced at his watch. "Okay, you two get settled in for now. I'll be right back to check if the presentation is ready." He ran to the laptop by the wall. Ethan and Danielle stayed close, exchanging friendly glances. "Have you been working with us for long?" she asked. "About 2 weeks," Ethan replied. "Marco found me through mutual friends. I'm a free agent, so to speak, helping with various eco-projects." "Great. People like you are worth their weight in gold, you know? Legal issues scare many young founders." Ethan shrugged modestly. "Glad to be of service. And how long have you been working with Oceanus?" "A little over a month." Daniela sat down on the edge of the table, crossing her arms. "I'm a freelancer, helping several startups at once, but I'm especially passionate about this one. The sea is my weakness." She smiled, and Ethan saw a spark of attraction in her eyes. "That's probably why you talk about him so effectively," he suggested. "Perhaps," she chuckled. "And why did you decide to take on such projects? Before this, you worked in a different field." Her question was cautious, without unnecessary curiosity, but Ethan felt a slight tension. He answered briefly. "Yes, I used to be in corporate law in California, but I decided to change my focus." Daniela, apparently sensing his restraint, nodded without further questioning. "I see. Well, welcome to the light side of the force, to those who save the world," she joked, as if to turn the conversation back to a light tone. Ethan smiled gratefully. He liked that she didn't pester him with questions. Marco returned soon after, and the three of them delved into a discussion about an upcoming presentation to a local environmental organization. Ethan offered advice on how to word the partnership agreement, and Danielle offered suggestions on how to present those same points to the audience so that they sounded inspiring rather than dry. The work was going well. Ethan noticed that Danielle was easy to work with. She listened attentively, asked pointed questions, and quickly grasped legal nuances, translating them into plain language. Several times their eyes accidentally met across the table when they began to speak at the same time, and they both laughed awkwardly, yielding a sentence to each other. By the end of the hour, the presentation was ready. Marco was very pleased. It turned out great. Thanks, guys. I think we'll conquer them tomorrow. Absolutely, Daniela confirmed, folding her laptop. Ethan, thank you for your clear wording. Without you, we would have probably missed something. I'm glad to help, he replied. Your corrections are also invaluable. I would never have thought of translating legal language into human language like that. Daniela smiled. Well, that means we're a great team. Marco winked and retreated to the engineers, saying, I won't bother you. Ethan pretended not to notice the implication, but he felt a slight blush touch his ears. Are you driving? If not, I can give you a lift to the city. I'm driving anyway. I thought about it on the bus, Ethan admitted, but your version sounds better. Then let's go, she nodded towards the exit. They stepped out into the fresh air. The sky had cleared a little, streaks of evening light peeking through the clouds. The parking lot near the warehouse was almost empty. Danielle pressed the key fob, and a silver station wagon responded. Please, sit down, she opened the passenger door. Ethan settled in, feeling unexpectedly at ease. While he usually avoided personal contact with new people outside of work, it was different with her. The car pulled out onto the road. Daniela turned on the radio, and a jazz tune began to play softly. How do you like our rainy city? She asked cheerfully, switching the windshield wipers. Rain was starting to drizzle on the glass again. You know, he surprised me, Ethan answered honestly. I've heard a lot about the grayness of Seattle, but there's so much color here, and the people are friendly. Yes, we are famous for our cool friendliness, she said jokingly. There's even a term for it, Seattle warmth, when everyone is polite, but distant. But I think that's a myth. I've only met good people so far, he nodded, and he thought about her. She definitely fell into that category. They started talking. Danielle turned out to be a native Seattleite. She grew up in the suburb of Bellevue, studied journalism in Washington, then went into PR. She told funny stories about working with scientists who were afraid of cameras and shared her impressions of the latest environmental actions in the city. Ethan found himself completely engrossed in the conversation. His usually wary soul began to thaw in her presence. It was already dark when they pulled up to his neighborhood. Danielle pulled up to the curb outside his house. Thanks for the ride, Ethan said, taking his time unbuckling his seatbelt. He suddenly didn't want this conversation to end. You're welcome, she replied. Maybe we can brainstorm again sometime. It was great. Of course, he smiled. I'm always ready to help. And to be honest, I'm glad to finally collaborate with someone who speaks the same language as me. Lawyers are usually not very popular. Well, I'm not one to be scared, Daniela laughed. Thank you for not being too critical of our legal loopholes. You learn quickly, Ethan responded. There was silence, but it wasn't awkward. They were just both in no hurry to say goodbye. Well, Daniela was the first to break the silence. Good luck at the presentation tomorrow. See you there? Of course, I will. Ethan opened the door and stepped out into the drizzling rain. Good night, Daniela. Good night, Ethan, she said softly. He slammed the door and waved at her as he walked away. The car drove away slowly. Ethan found himself smiling as he walked up to his room. For the first time in months, he was returning home with a light heart. Meeting Danielle was like a breath of fresh air. He barely knew her, but he already felt a kinship. The thought was a little scary, but also warm. The next few weeks flew by. Ethan and Danielle often crossed paths at work, joint meetings with projects, discussions of strategies, and simply exchanging news about environmental initiatives in the city. They exchanged phone numbers and occasionally called each other to discuss various ideas. Gradually, business communication grew into friendship. One day, after a successful performance by the Oceanist team at an environmental forum, the entire company engineers, volunteers, Ethan and Daniela went to celebrate at a small bar on Fremont. Ethan sat next to Daniela at a wooden table under garlands of retro lamps, listening to Marco excitedly talk about the prospects of their drones. Daniela, laughing, poured everyone more local ale. Ethan found himself looking at her more and more often. How her face lit up when she smiled, how she encouraged everyone, be it a shy programmer or a bartender who had mixed up an order. "Let's drink with new friends," someone from the team proclaimed, raising a mug. Everyone clinked glasses. Danielle gently banged her glass against Ethan's, looking him straight in the eye. "To friendship," she repeated warmly. Ethan smiled and took a sip of his foamy ale. His heart ached at that look. There was so much genuine joy and closeness in it. Later, when the party was winding down, he and Danielle went outside to get some fresh air. The night was clear and cool, the moon reflected in the waters of the canal. "It was a good day today," she said quietly, leaning on the railing of the bridge near the bar. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, standing next to him. "I'm happy for the guys. They're great." "You're a good boy, too," she added, glancing quickly at him. "You're a great help to them." "I'm trying to work off the beer they're treating me to," he chuckled. She shook her head. "No, really. Since you arrived, things have been going well for many people. It's like you brought calm and confidence." Ethan was embarrassed. "They give me confidence, to be honest. Their enthusiasm is infectious." Daniela slightly covered his hand with hers, which was lying on the railing. "It seems to me that you are quite enthusiastic yourself, just a little sad inside." Ethan froze, feeling the warmth of her palm. She said those words so directly, sad inside. I... He didn't know what to answer or whether he should. Daniela gently removed her hand. "Sorry, it's none of my business." "It's okay," he said quickly. "You're right. A lot has happened in the last few months." She was silent, waiting to see if he would continue. The night hid half his face in shadow, but he felt her attentive gaze on him. Ethan took a deep breath of the cool air. "I came here to start a new life. In California, I lost a lot, including faith in myself." The words flowed by themselves, unexpectedly easily in her presence. "Do you want to tell me?" she asked quietly. He nodded almost imperceptibly, and looking at the moonlit path on the water, he began to speak, briefly, without details, but clearly enough. He told me that he had gone through a difficult breakup, that his family had not supported him, and he had decided to move as far away as possible to forget everything. He did not name names, did not go into details about the betrayal, only generalities. His voice trembled on some phrases, but he continued, feeling relieved that he was finally opening up to someone. When he finished, both were silent for a while. Daniela was the first to break the silence. "You know, I'm really sorry you had to go through that." He turned his head, there was sympathy and tenderness in her eyes. "But I'm glad you found the strength not to break down," she continued. "You do good things, you help people. Not everyone would be able to not become embittered after something like that." Ethan smiled bitterly. "There were moments when I thought I hated the whole world. But, thank you. Your words mean a lot." Daniela gently touched his shoulder. "If you suddenly want to talk or just take a break, I'm here." Without any PR reason, she added with a slight smile. Ethan looked back at her with gratitude. His heart was pounding somewhere in his throat. He wanted to hug her now, tightly, tightly, like a close person who finally understood him. But he only said quietly, "Thank you. You are amazing." He stopped short, frightened by his own frankness. However, Daniela only smiled sadly. "I'm just trying to be a good friend." Ethan looked away at the water, trying to calm the emotions that were flooding in. This was perhaps the closest he had allowed himself to have a heart-to-heart moment since the divorce, and it was scary. Their friendship grew stronger in the following days. Danielle truly became Ethan's rock. She would send him a funny text message in the middle of the day to cheer him up, or drop by unexpectedly with coffee if he was stuck working on paperwork. They went to the movies together a couple of times as friends, although they both sensed that something more was brewing. But neither was in a hurry to upset the fragile balance. Ethan noticed that he began to wake up in the mornings thinking about her, anticipating a new meeting or conversation. Meanwhile, autumn was coming into its own. The leaves in the city parks flared with crimson and gold. The rain began to drum on the windows more often. One weekend, Danielle invited Ethan to go out of town to show him the surroundings. They spent the whole day on the Olympic Peninsula, walking among majestic firs and mysterious mossy forests. Raindrops sparkled on the ferns under their feet. The air was transparently clean and cool. They came out to a mirror-like mountain lake, surrounded by peaks drowning in clouds. The landscape was mesmerizing. Next to Danielle, every moment seemed brighter. They chatted about childhood memories, about dreams, laughed at silly jokes, and simply remained silent, listening to the rustle of the forest. The solitude of nature brought them even closer. There, on one of the paths, Danielle picked a wild blackberry from a bush and handed it to him as a trophy. Ethan laughed sincerely for the first time and could not help but carefully brush away a strand of hair that had fallen into her eyes. For a moment they froze very close to each other, but both hastened to pretend that nothing special had happened. Nevertheless, the spark between them only flared stronger. However, despite all the warmth of the relationship, Ethan still struggled with his fears. At night, when he was alone, he wondered, what if he idealized Daniela? What if he trusted her again and was betrayed again? It was difficult to get rid of this shadow, and although his mind understood that Daniela was a completely different person, kind, honest, his heart, burned in the past, beat warily. Finally, the day came when fate seemed to decide to test whether he was ready to move on. On Saturday morning, Ethan stopped at Pike Place Market to pick up some freshly baked goods for breakfast. He and Danielle were planning to spend the weekend together, going to an ocean photography exhibit and then to dinner. Ethan was looking forward to the day. They had grown even closer lately, and a quiet joy was growing inside him. He was walking along the embankment with a bag of warm croissants towards the parking lot when he noticed a familiar silhouette standing near a cafe. Daniela? Yes, it was her, sitting at an outdoor table, a man sitting opposite her. They were chatting animatedly. Ethan slowed down, instinctively hiding behind a souvenir stand. His heart gave an unpleasant pang. Why was Daniela here, and with whom? The man leaned closer to her, saying something. Daniela smiled. Ethan saw the profile of her face. She looked pleased, even joyful. He could not make out any details on the stranger, only noted his dark hair and glasses. The next second, something happened that made the blood run cold. The man reached across the table and covered Daniela's palm. She did not pull away, on the contrary. She gently squeezed his hand, continuing to speak with a warm smile. Ethan felt the world spinning around him. A picture of Morgan and Julian on the dock, their silhouettes entwined under a street lamp, appeared before his eyes like a bolt of lightning. He turned sharply, trying not to make any noise, and hurried away, clutching the bag of croissants until it crunched. Calm down. You don't know anything, pounded in his head. But emotions tore at his chest. Pain, jealousy, fear. Could it be again? Could it be that Daniela too? No, that was stupid. They weren't even officially a couple. Maybe she just had a friend or acquaintance. But why were they holding hands so tenderly? He remembered. She looked contented, happy, exactly how he liked to see her next to him. And that smile was caused by someone else. Ethan got into the car, trying to stop his fingers from shaking. The croissants smelled strongly of almonds, and the smell suddenly made him feel nauseous. He closed his eyes, trying to collect himself. Maybe it was all understandable. He should just ask her. But fear paralyzed him. What if she really did have someone? He hadn't even confessed his feelings to her directly. What if she didn't take their meetings seriously? Maybe she only saw him as a friend. His thoughts were racing. Ethan started the engine and drove away from the ill-fated cafe, not looking around. An exhibition, dinner. He couldn't imagine how he would go with her now, pretending he hadn't seen anything. At home, he threw the bag on the table. His appetite had completely disappeared. His phone beeped with a new message, probably from Daniela. He didn't look. His heart sank with bitter irony. As soon as he let someone into his soul, everything threatened to repeat itself. About an hour of painful reflection passed. Finally, Ethan took a deep breath and made a decision. He would cancel the meeting, citing poor health. And then we would see. He picked up his phone. Several of the messages were indeed from Danielle. The first was an excited smiley face, and "I can't wait to go to the exhibition." The second, a little later, "I hope you're not at the market anymore. It's so crowded today." And the last, very recent, "Hi, how are you?" Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and typed a reply. "Hi, I'm not feeling well. I think I've caught a cold. I'm afraid I won't be able to get out today." The answer came almost instantly. "Oh no, how are you? How can I help you?" He quickly typed, "Everything is fine. I just need some peace. Sorry it fell through." The phone was silent for a few minutes. Then one word, "Understood." She wrote nothing more. Ethan dropped the phone and ran his hands over his face. He felt terrible. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he should have gone there right away, approached her, asked her directly. But at that moment, he didn't have the courage. The rest of the day passed in a heavy stupor. Ethan either mindlessly flipped through television channels or tried to read, but to no avail. By evening, anxiety had given way to dull apathy. He tried his best to push away the mental images of Danielle with that man, but they kept coming back. Sunday morning was as gray as his mood. It was drizzling outside, and crooked streams were running down the glass. Ethan was sitting in the kitchen with his coffee cooling when there was a knock on the door. He tensed up. No one came to him without warning. He walked up and looked through the peephole and froze. Daniela was standing on the threshold, soaked in the rain, although in a raincoat, with a determined expression on her face. His heart pounded. Ethan hesitated for a split second, then unlocked the door and swung it open. "Hello," she said quietly, looking straight at him. "Can I come in?" "Why, yes, of course." He stepped back, letting her in. The guest shook the drops from the folds of her cloak and froze in the hallway. There was a tense pause. Up close, Ethan could see the dark circles under her eyes. It looked like she hadn't slept well either. "How are you?" Danielle asked, her voice filled with concern. "Better already," he answered mechanically. "I'm glad to hear it," she said without a trace of a smile. "It's a pity you got sick yesterday." She looked into his eyes, and Ethan felt that she understood everything. He looked down. "Sorry." Daniela sighed. "Ethan, what's going on?" He was silent, not knowing what to say. She continued, trying to speak calmly. "You suddenly become distant, come up with strange excuses. Does this have something to do with me?" He swallowed convulsively. "No, I mean," he looked up, his eyes full of torment. I saw you yesterday morning." Daniela frowned slightly. "Where?" "At the cafe on the embankment. You were with some man." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. She was silent for a few seconds, thinking. "You mean Aaron?" she asked carefully. Ethan shrugged, feeling awkward. "I don't know his name." Daniela bit her lip, her eyes widening. "And what did you think?" He smiled bitterly, turning away. "I don't know. Nothing. Your hands." He fell silent, that gesture resurfacing in his memory. Daniela suddenly swore quietly. "Crap." She stepped closer. "Aaron is my brother." Ethan turned around abruptly. "Who?" "My older brother," she repeated firmly. "He flew in from Chicago to visit and made a surprise. I just happened to run into him this morning. He came to the market for coffee. We hadn't seen each other for a year, so I was happy." Ethan's mouth dropped open, staring at her in shock. "Brother." "Yes, brother." Daniela crossed her arms, shaking slightly, either from her wet clothes or from the emotions that had washed over her. He held my hand because I was complaining to him about my problems about you, by the way. Her eyes sparkled. I was telling him that I was afraid that my colleague likes me, but he still couldn't bring himself to open his heart to me. Ethan felt a wave of heat wash over his face. Oh my God, he breathed out. Daniela, So you decided that I was lying, that I was two-faced. Her voice trembled. After everything we shared with each other, you think that I could go behind your back. No, he stepped towards her, choking with emotion. Forgive me, I'm an idiot. He wanted to touch, but he didn't dare. His hands hung like whips. My damn fear, he said hoarsely. I can't think straight anymore when it comes to trust. Daniela started, tears glistening on her eyelashes, but she did not let them fall. I understand, she finally said quietly. I know this is hard for you. But Ethan, I'm not her. He closed his eyes, feeling a hot tear roll down his cheek. The next moment, warm fingers wiped the tear away. Danielle touched his face, forcing him to look at her. I will never betray you, she said firmly. Do you believe me? Ethan nodded, sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so ashamed. I ruined everything. I didn't ruin it. She shook her head and suddenly hugged him impulsively. Just don't do it again, please. His arms finally found courage. He held her tightly to him, as he had feared and dreamed at the same time. There was no need for words. She was here, in his arms, real. I was so afraid of losing you, he whispered into her hair. And out of fear, I almost pushed you away. Daniela pulled back just enough to see his eyes. Do you know how to get rid of fear? He looked at her questioningly. You have to look him in the face, she smiled through her tears, and also be honest to the end. She took a deep breath. I love you, Ethan. A lot. His throat tightened. He almost couldn't believe he was hearing it. He tried to pull himself together. I love you too, Daniela. I love. And before he could finish speaking, her lips met his in a long, greedy kiss, the one they had both been missing for months. The pain of the past and the promise of the future, fears and hopes were all mixed up in that kiss. Ethan kissed her, feeling the invisible wall around his heart break. What had kept him at a distance for so long collapsed, leaving only love. When they broke apart, they both caught their breath. Danielle ran her hand through his hair gently. Well, now no ghosts are scary to us. Ethan smiled through happy tears. With you, I'm not afraid. They stood in the hallway, hugging each other, and the rain outside no longer seemed gloomy. It seemed to be washing away the remnants of the past, preparing a clear path forward for them. A year has passed. Ethan's life has turned upside down, but this time on the bright side. He has thrown himself into working with environmental projects, turning his volunteer work into a full-fledged consulting activity. Together with Daniela, he has become inseparable, as partners in business and in life. What began as a friendly union has blossomed into a strong love. One summer day, Ethan stood on the porch of a cozy house on Bainbridge Island, watching the sunset melt over the waters of the bay. He and Danielle had purchased the house a few months earlier, tired of the city noise. The spacious wooden cottage overlooking a quiet bay had become their refuge. Every day after work, they took the ferry to the island and left the bustle of Seattle behind. Today the house was filled with the chaos of moving boxes, packages, furniture half arranged. They were finally moving the things from the city apartment. Danielle was bustling around inside, sorting out dishes, and Ethan had stepped outside for a minute, catching the salty breeze mixed with the scent of pine trees. He held an old photograph in his hands, the same wedding photo that had once hung in his house in Palo Alto. In it, he and Morgan were young and beaming with happiness. The photo had been accidentally found in the papers when they were being packed. It must have gotten lost among the documents. Ethan looked at it for a long time, but there was no pain or anger in his soul, only a quiet sadness for the naive person he had been. That person thought that life was simple and predictable. But fate had shown otherwise and eventually brought him here, where he found true happiness. Footsteps behind him brought him out of his thoughts. Danielle hugged him from behind, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. How are you? She asked softly. Ethan turned his head towards her and smiled. Okay, I was just thinking. She noticed the photograph in his hands. Ethan held it out to her. I found this. I think it's time to let go finally. Daniela nodded in understanding. He slowly tore the photograph in half, then again, and the booklet of scraps was blown away to the ground. Goodbye, past, he said quietly, watching the white pieces fall to the grass. He thought of his parents, too. They had barely spoken in the past year. Richard Caldwell had won re-election and was immersed in his work, sending occasional greetings through his sister, and Lauren had written him a few careful, loving letters. Ethan had gradually let go of his resentment toward them. Time and happiness with Danielle had healed old wounds. Perhaps one day they would find their way back to each other, but he was no longer chasing his father's approval. Daniela stroked his hand. Are you proud of yourself? He looked at her in surprise. By being able to go through all this and remain myself, not become embittered. Ethan smiled slightly. If it weren't for you and Claire, he began, but Danielle shook her head. No, this is your victory. We were just walking next to each other. He turned to her and hugged her around the waist. In any case, I couldn't have done it without you. They stood there for a few seconds, looking into each other's eyes, reflecting the setting sun and the years of trials that lay behind them. By the way, Claire called an hour ago, Danielle remembered. They'll be arriving on the first ferry tomorrow. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. His sister was coming over for the weekend to visit with her new boyfriend. Claire was so happy for her brother that she visited them often, and she and Danielle had become friends since their first meeting. It was going to be a fun weekend. Excellent. I'll have to go get some fresh croissants in the morning, he smiled. Daniela narrowed her eyes slyly. Just no adventures this time, okay? Ethan laughed, shaking his head. I promise, no misunderstandings. He kissed her gently on the tip of her nose. Together they returned to the house to finish packing the last of their things. Among the papers in the living room, Ethan noticed a thick envelope with an official seal, a letter from the lawyers, received a month ago. It was a notice of the end of the court case, in which Julian Wright was a defendant. Ethan had read the letter back then, and it was only the final point. His former friend had admitted guilt in financial fraud and blackmail, receiving his sentence. This no longer affected Ethan in any way, except that it made him think for a moment about the vicissitudes of fate. The man he considered a brother had fallen so low, and Ethan himself, having gone through hell, had risen. Are you still thinking about him? Daniela asked, noticing what he was looking at. No, he answered honestly, putting the envelope back in the archive box. It's finished. He slammed the box shut, stamping his thoughts with a thick seal. The past was dead. When everything was cleared away and night had already fallen on the island, Ethan and Danielle went out onto the terrace with glasses of wine. The moon silvered the calm surface of the bay. Somewhere in the water, a fish splashed. The wind rustled through the forest. They did not need words. They sat, holding hands, enjoying the silence and closeness. You know, Daniela said suddenly, sometimes you have to go through a storm to appreciate the calm. Ethan squeezed her hand a little tighter. You're right. He looked at her profile in the moonlight, a familiar and beloved face, and again he felt a wave of gratitude to the universe for everything having turned out this way. Do you regret anything? She asked, as if reading his thoughts. Nothing, he answered quietly. Everything led me to you. She turned her head, and their lips met in a short, tender kiss. I love you, Danielle whispered. And I you, he responded. The night was quiet and peaceful. New days were waiting for them ahead, perhaps also difficult, but he was not afraid, because his loved one was nearby and in his soul peace. The past was left far behind, turning from pain into experience and wisdom, and the future beckoned with a quiet harbor in which they now found themselves. Early in the morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of birds singing outside his window. Soft rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the bedroom with a gentle golden light. He quietly got out of bed so as not to wake the sweetly sleeping Danielle and went out onto the porch. The morning was cool and calm. A light fog hung over the bay through which the sun shone. The air smelled of sea salt and pine resin. Somewhere in the distance, the first ferry out of Seattle hummed, a sound that had become a familiar lullaby of their island days. Ethan took a deep breath. He remembered dozens of other mornings in the past, the rush, the worries, the emptiness in his chest. But now there was a quiet joy inside. This house, this island, this morning all were symbols of a new chapter, pure and bright. There was a mug left on the table by the entrance from the night before. Ethan picked it up and walked into the kitchen. Soon the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the house. He poured 2 mugs and went back outside. The door creaked and Danielle appeared on the threshold, wrapped in a light blanket. "Good morning," she smiled sleepily. "Good morning, my love," Ethan replied, handing her the cup. She came over and clung to him, and together they leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the awakening morning. "The guests are still on the way. We can relax a little," Daniela said quietly, taking a sip of coffee. "Aha," he confirmed, gently rubbing his cheek against the top of her head. For a while, they just stood there in silence. A seagull cried out over the water, and the dawn turned the clouds peach. "You know, I never thought I'd enjoy living on an island so much," Daniela said. "Do you think you'll fit in?" Ethan jokes. "With you, I'll fit in anywhere," she smiled, raising her face to him. Ethan touched his lips to her forehead. "And I'm with you." They fell silent again, enjoying every moment. Ethan ran his hand through her hair and spoke quietly, as if putting a period out loud. "I'm happy." Daniela looked into his eyes. Hers were shining. "You deserve it." He shook his head. "We deserve it." In the distance, the white silhouette of a ferry appeared, gliding toward the shore. But it was still far away, and the morning belonged only to the two of them. Ethan felt the last shadows of the past dissipate along with the fog. All the bad things were left on the other shore. Here, on this quiet island, their new life began honest, bright, devoid of lies and pain. A life where the morning greets them with warmth and the future beckons with quiet happiness. He hugged Danielle tighter. There would be many days ahead, different ones, but they would meet them together. And now there was only this peaceful morning, the light steam from the cups of coffee, and a heart full of love and peace. The past is behind us. A new day has arrived. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.